welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy Podcast. We are reading the Phaedo. Thank you for joining me. We are trying to discover what exactly is philosophy and what exactly isn't philosophy, and what are the implications of both. What's the implications of being and living the life of a philosopher, and what would follow if we don't? To do that, we have been learning something called the Logos. And as we are learning the Logos, we are trying to understand what exactly the Logos is. We have a few ways of understanding the Logos. It's some sort of pattern. It's to do with language. It's something that makes things understandable. And we are applying the Logos to understand those things that we're interested in understanding through something called the dialectic. So equally so, we are learning the dialectic as we go and applying that specifically to the questions we're most interested in. What does it mean to be a philosopher? What does it mean to live the life of a philosopher? What happens when you die if you're a philosopher? How do you relate to death as a philosopher? And what do you expect to find when you're in that place that you're going to after you die? And of course, we are, as the dialectic insists, understanding what is involves also understanding what isn't. So to these sorts of questions, we ask the question, what happens if philosophy doesn't exist? What happens if we don't live the life of a philosopher? What happens if we don't study and practice the art of death and dying and being dead as part of the activity of the philosopher? What would follow for us, for our friends, and for humanity at large? It has been wonderful and fun and interesting and exciting and meaningful to go through all of this. And last time we got Socrates' defense. He pointed out that his previous defense that got him in jail didn't go down too well. He wasn't able to persuade enough people to the benefit of philosophy, to the necessity of philosophy, to the importance and benefit of philosophy. And as such, they are going to kill him. And we're sad about that. That's a big sad for us. And we do this. And we're sad and it rains. But he is giving a different defense. He's giving a defense with his friends in the prison cell on his last day, a defense of philosophy. And last time we got to the end of it, it included a information for us to do our dialectic on what if the soul can exist separate from the body. We also did a dialectic of what happens, a dialectic on how to pull off that stunt, how to separate the soul from the body, that method, which is actually can be understood as purification. It was a dialectic on purification, which involves the separation of the soul from the body. And at the end of that dialectic, we realized that this purification is actually the same thing as death, which is a fascinating and new and different way of looking at death. And we're also building our own dialectics on philosophy as a whole. Last time we started one on as dialectic includes two primary ideas, the thing you're interested in and something you're rubbing up against it, a self and an other. We are using death as the other. So bringing in our past dialectics on what is the soul separate from the body, number one, fed into our dialectic on purification or death. And then we can use that in our dialectic on how can you understand philosophy itself in relation to death, other. How can you use this idea of death to better understand philosophy? So we've been taking notes on that as well. So our understanding is folding in upon itself and like a snowball, building as it turns around. And of course, that kind of learning that involves a kind of self-reflection using specifically the Logos and the dialectic applied to the realm of being up there without using our senses as much as possible. Something we call dianoia, understanding. The use of this turned about upon yourself or the self ideas is called ousia. So we're becoming most like ousia, which is a fantastic word, a new word, a word we are introducing into the English language because we don't have one for it. And we are becoming most like ousia as much as possible in this third dimension. Of course, what we're learning about philosophy opens up necessarily other dimensions, higher dimensions. The fourth dimension, perhaps, is what we will encounter when we separate the soul from the body. I don't know, that's a question. But also the idea of dimensions reflecting upon themselves, with each level being a diminishment or a distortion, each lower dimension lacking something fundamental and important of the higher dimensions, allows us to understand our problems. We've been talking about the mirror as an analogy. If you look in the mirror, you see a reflection of you, but it lacks a dimension. It's a two-dimensional image. And also it lacks some important things. It lacks the image you're looking at is fundamentally distorted. Left is right and right is left. That's not actually the truth. Also, your mirror image lacks intelligence. It lacks understanding. It lacks will. It lacks the ability to participate through the intelligence of the logos. Share in the logos. It lacks wonder. So we're using this as a metaphor to understand our problems. And also understand what philosophy isn't. So our problems we've been talking about can be seen as a reflection of the divine in a lower dimension, lower even than the third dimension. Fundamentally false teachers, fundamentally not beautiful, fundamentally distorted ideas of justice, but appearing to be beautiful, just, good, all of those self-ideas, and therefore leave a lasting impression, just like being is supposed to leave on us. So our soul-seeking being, and wanting to use that as a paradigm for our own existence, our own way of living, a path that we can walk to our highest destiny, to the nature of reality itself, which has beauty and justice and goodness and all of the self-ideas in it. But also, we, as philosophers, we wonder, well, what is the self that's even experiencing that? So you could say being is a gateway to the ultimate destiny of man. And our problems are nothing other than doing that same thing, continually walking a path towards that, except we're not walking towards that, we're walking towards the distorted image of beauty and justice. And the logos we gain from that isn't the self-logos, which we're developing through studying the Phaedo, but the anti-logos, that which tells us not to do that. The objections, and Socrates has been talking about how those sort of objections can flood in and drive us out of our mind. The anti-logos or the pathologos. If we're talking about the fundamental false beliefs that we don't even know we're carrying from that early spiritual initiation of the false appearance of being. Our early teachers, when we were very young and we were reliant upon them and we didn't have the logos yet, we couldn't really use our words very well. Appearing beautiful, appearing knowing, appearing just, all of the things of being that we're studying and we're seeking, the image of that was a kind of initiation which was the early cause of our problems. And as such, we can, if we are going to walk the true logos towards our true philosophical goal, as Socrates is very much encouraging us to do, and not only defining the path for us, but demonstrating it himself in his life, then we have to perfect ourselves in that way, but purify ourselves from all of the false images that usurping the throne, that are sitting in the spots that the Logos ideas should be. So sweeping up the bad path, getting rid of that path. Okay, this idea of definition and demonstration we recognize as a duad. Socrates himself says, okay, lots of balloons, we're happy about that. Socrates himself says that he's going to define or accurately explain where he is going and what it's like in that place, but also demonstrate it through mythology. Definition and demonstration go together as a philosopher. Likewise, we are trying to define what it means to be a philosopher, and the act of doing so is our demonstration of that. So too, we are trying to define the Logos and define dialectic, but as we read, we are demonstrating it. We are doing our best to create our own. It doesn't have to be perfect straight away, we just have to be in the game. Okay, so that's been what we've been talking about, the idea of diminished reflections, and allowing that as a way of understanding what we have to purify ourselves from as being a reflection of that which we are perfecting ourselves through. Okay, and the last read along we had together, which was the ending of Socrates' defense, ended with a kind of true initiation, which can add more to our understanding of the path, but also understanding of what causes our problems. And the two words we have to define that: our path leads us to destiny, and our problems keep us trapped, chained like those chained to their, like Socrates with the chains around his legs in prison. In the cave analogy, those chained so they can only see the shadows on the wall of the cave. And what Socrates said here, chained to the physical body. If we don't practice the dialectic and practice this art of separating our soul from the body and experiencing death as much as we can while we're alive, and also when our final death, what do we do there? How do we practice and prepare ourselves for that as well? Okay, so we recognize that the images of being is a necessary condition for our problems, our pathologos. However, what makes our problems different from true being is there's no logos. Thumbs up. Philosophy is a mystic tradition, but we're getting there through understanding, through the logos and the dialectic. Okay, Socrates made that clear by saying, hey, many people carry the staff that a mystic carries, but very few are actual inspired mystics. All right? Many claim to be spiritual people, but few are actually true spiritual people. And he says, by the way, true spirituality is true philosophy. Okay, so this goes into understanding what philosophy is, but also understanding what philosophy isn't. There are many people who like to present themselves as philosophers, but neglect fundamentally that it's a mystic tradition. So they carry the staff, but actually don't participate in the spiritual element, what Socrates is making very clear, of philosophy. And of course, what follows? Well, a lot of people get put off from philosophy. They see it as dry or academic or just arguing opinions or being a big jerk telling people they're wrong because they don't agree with your opinions. So who wants to do that? Not me. Not anyone. Well, okay, there are a lot of people who find that a very attractive occupation, a very attractive job. I get to tell people my opinions and act like I'm the big boss man. All right, so there are some people like that. But as philosophers, we're not interested in that. So we're not really interested in the way that philosophy is being presented because it lacks what is most fundamentally meaningful, which is what? The self. The self and your state of mind, your way of being. What good is philosophy if it doesn't change you for the better? Doesn't change how you feel, how you be, how you exist, and how you fundamentally relate to yourself. not just in this life, but always. Hey, your physical body changes all through your life, but there's something that stays the same. What is that? And if that thing that we call the self stays the same through changes in your physical body, does it even stay the same at the end of your life? Socrates is saying yes. There is something that remains. And that's what we want to purify ourselves to be. So it sounds like that which remains even after our physical death is the most like ourselves. Which is one big part of why philosophy is a mystic tradition or involves this separation of the soul from the body. Also, the idea of many other staff bearers, but few are the inspired mystics or true philosophers. We could also talk about not just the academic philosophers who neglect the mystical aspect of philosophy, the meaningful, applying it to your state of consciousness and your being. You could even say the self-triad that we've been talking about changes fundamentally how you see and understand the world, your self-logos, your fundamental state of mind, self-mind or self-being, and your fundamental relationship and recognition of the one self, yourself, your mind, and your thinking and seeing. The self-triad. If that's not involved, if it doesn't change those things, then it's not really meaningful, is it? It's not the game that we are in. Last time we talked about the anti-version of that, which is used to silence people's development in philosophy. We could summarize in one word: evil. How do you define evil? Well, someone is evil, or the reality is evil, or the cause of problems are evil if they don't have reason. You can't reason with someone evil. There's no self-logos. They're fundamentally deceitful and bad, so their state of mind is fundamentally a false, a lie, and their fundamental self is innately wrong, poisonous, a bad influence. And we're saying, hey, it is the best influence. In fact, it is the cause of all. Everything is from self, in self, and returning to self. That's our journey. That's Ousia. And that return is for all intelligent living beings, so we call it the destiny of man. So, you could take out this whole many other staff bearers catchphrase that we're going to put on the bumper sticker of our cars. Refers to, obviously, the academics who call themselves philosophers but miss this. And of course, this is not personal. This isn't a slight or attack. This is just understanding where we are. In order to improve, we have to recognize where we are and approach that with an open mind. Something that you can recognize in all of Socrates' dialogues is, hey, I like to be shown that I'm missing the mark. So long as it's happening under certain conditions with a friend where we can talk and relate and we're helping each other out. It's not to make me feel bad, and if I can make you wrong, then I can fundamentally prove that the self-triad is bad. You're stupid, you're bad, you're wrong, you're evil, you're sinful, you're lesser. Hey, if we're all the self, we're not lesser. Sure, there are levels of development into purifying and perfecting our recognition, our understanding, our state of mind of self. But if we are all self, then no one is meaningless. No one is lesser. No one should be made to feel rubbish about their nature. Only the ignorance we carry from a false initiation. Okay, so this is never personal. We do it in the spirit of wonder and curiosity and learning. So, when I mention this about philosophers who might be interested in the logos but miss the mystical, it's not a personal thing. Likewise, the other way, those who are interested in the mystical of philosophy but lack the logos. Okay, there are lots of Eastern spiritual traditions that we can recognize have a very strong and powerful mystical element but lack the understanding, lack the self-logos. And the more we learn about the logos and the structure of the logos, which we can represent as the dialectic following that same structure, most simply outlining it. Hey, two categories: self, other, other self. It's like a pure version of that structure. All right, the structure of the logos. The more we learn about the logos and the dialectic, the more we can recognize, when applied to mystical traditions, you can recognize there is equally a hierarchy and a development through there, based on their understanding and development of the logos, that also relates to the level of enlightenment or mystical experiences that they have. Again, thumbs up. But again, not personal. All right. Which is difficult to hear. Our problems are often we need a certain level of courage to face. And we need openness to engage in this friendly dialogue that we're engaged in on this channel and we're engaged in as true philosophers, right? Because if you have this, you're not putting people down. You're opening the conversation and you recognize we're here for a reason. We're here to purify and perfect. And part of that is like Socrates is saying, hey, under these conditions, I want to hear where I'm mistaken so that I can improve myself. Not to be made to feel like I'm bad, but through dialogue, through the dialectic, I can learn from my mistakes. I can purify and perfect myself. I can grow. So in fact, I'd rather find out where I'm mistaken than be correct in the conversation and help you. I'd rather help myself. This is Socrates' attitude. We need to have that when we uncover false beliefs or false thinking that we are limited by ourselves. And of course, because of how beautiful and just they appeared, even if it was a shadow of the truth, it can be very hard to let go of. Why? Because we love that which is most beautiful and good. Which is why we need courage and trust in the logos. Right, Socrates says to us, how do we relate others to others? How do us philosophers relate to each other? We talk in this way, and we repeat it over and over as much as we can. There's a quote from Socrates somewhere else where he says, if something is worth saying, it's worth saying many times. And we say it to each other and we believe it. There is an element of trust involved, which is difficult. Every human being has this ignorance. Every human being, therefore, needs to go through this purification. So it's not personal, but every human being feels like their ignorance is right. And feels like they want to defend their false beliefs and defend their actually unjust teachers. That's why we need courage, a virtue that we put into ourselves through discipline, to hold on to the logos and trust the logos. In the Republic, you can look up the Republic in, I think it's book 3 or 4, where courage is defined, trusting in what the logos outlines. But we just read in the Phaedo that we go from believing and repeating it to affirming it in truth, which involves a progression from belief in this, true belief, we could say, to understanding, seeing the logos, seeing how and why it must be true and how it fits into the patterns that we're developing in the logos, and then confirming it through your direct experience, experiencing it as truth. Okay, so on that note, these spiritual traditions who are also staff bearers, literally, they're called mystics, they're called spiritual traditions. So many other staff bearers, a few other true inspired mystics, the true philosophers, we could say, well, what level are you able to experience in your tradition and why? Not only that, can you recognize all of the states of mind and all of the different kinds of logos? This is the significance of philosophy. This is why Socrates is saying, hey, the true mystical tradition is philosophy. Getting there through and via and taking with us the logos. So, and it's not just Eastern spiritual traditions that misuse the mystic idea or have the false idea of philosophy. It's in our current Western culture, there are a lot of New Age philosophies. People who call themselves philosophers, but they're just talking about their feelings. Or they're just talking about experiences they have, but they lack the understanding. So you could say the academics lack the mystical, and the New Agers, or I don't know what the word is for these sorts of people. I feel it, so therefore it's true. Relativists, we would say, might have mystical experiences but lack the reasoning of the academics. In philosophy, we want both. So, and we can recognize that as our duad of definition and demonstration, or understanding and knowledge, or in Greek, dianoia and nous. And we can use all of these because we have a skill tree of twos, because the Logos also reflects upon itself in an ordered structure. Right, so last time we got to the end of his defense of philosophy, where he used this expression about many other staff bearers, few are the true philosophers or inspired mystics. And he also pointed out, hey, by the way, there is a certain progression or development in this way through this exercise that leads to a certain kind of initiation, which means our recognition of the false initiation experience, that's the cause of our problems, has its correlate, its lesser greater pair. The lesser, or the distorted lower dimension initiation experience, where our teacher appeared most like being, appeared most good and knowing and caring, has its correlate in truth. So we can say all vice is a distorted reflection of virtue. And in virtue, what we are, thumbs up for that. And what we are after is this kind of rite of initiation, he calls it. And he gives us some clues to unpack what that might be. At the end of his defense of philosophy and living the life of a philosopher. He is being killed because the state is saying, hey, don't live this life. Don't do this. No, naughty boy, don't do it. In fact, in the prison cell, he has his friend saying, hey, look, a lot of people realize that this charge against you is a trumped up thing, and the guards are even willing to look the other way and let you out. Why don't you just stop doing philosophy? And if you just leave and you don't do philosophy anymore, these rulers will stay off your back. And Socrates is like, no, I'm not going to stop doing philosophy ever. I'm on a tour of duty. I'm appointed here. In fact, in the Apology, I'm on a tour of duty is something we've read in the Phaedo, but in the Apology, he says, I'm God's gift to mankind. I've been stationed here. So we know the lesser version of that, I'm God's gift to mankind, is usually spoken by people who are foolish. So Socrates is saying, yeah, no, that actually legitimately applies to me. So I'm not going to desert my post. I'm going to live the life of a philosopher, and everybody should. We all should. And he's saying, look, that defense didn't convince everyone in my trial, but I hope it will convince you. And we are about to read whether or not he did convince Simmias and Cebes, our pair of buddies that are kind of our surrogates. Like, if Socrates was our friend and he's on death's door, we would be upset to lose him. We'd be like, no, just run away. Don't die. We need you. Come on, man. You're Socrates. You're the big dog. But he's saying, look, I'm going to give you my defense. I'm not upset about my death. I'm in good hope and good spirits that I'm going somewhere where I will be with good and wise gods. And I will be able to have good conversations with better men that you'll find here. And there is also the idea that maybe men who have completed their tour of duty, they've perfected and purified themselves and escaped the cycles of reincarnation, which is what we are hoping to do. All right, level up cosmically. So in that way, I'm going to be of good spirits. Right, and Phaedo said, well, he looked to me to be like a good daemon himself. The very thing that he's been murdered or put in prison and, killed for believing in, the daemon, said he looked like one himself. He became most like, which is a puzzle. What does that mean, to be most like a daemon? And how does that relate to our destiny? And Phaedo said, if any man was going to fare well in the next life and also be still connected and sharing in providence, it is Socrates. That's our account of Socrates from Phaedo. But in the defense that we just read, he concluded by saying, I will find good masters and good friends, and you can trust in this. And that's my defense, and I hope it was more persuasive to you than to the Athenian jury. Okay? And he said, by the way, others who go there are like they lie outstretched in a barbarous bog. So this is the kind of state of mind people who haven't gone through this purification perfection have when they are just mind. When they don't have the body, so they're not a mixture of mind and body, they're just mind. They encounter the next life in a bog. That's a curious thing to say. All right, so this idea of initiation we want to get into. And also, we do both. We'll understand what is the true initiation, to understand what we're after, and also what would be its lesser dimension reflection that we have to purify ourselves from, that is the cause of our pathologos. How can we understand the conditions of that so we can fairly and sufficiently address them to free us from our chains of fate and free us from the intruding thoughts that prevent us from doing philosophy all the time or doing it as best as we can. This idea of using the separation of the soul from the body to do philosophy better was one of the reasons why we got into this in the first place. Previously, we were reading the Parmenides, and after we finished this first hypothesis of the one self, which is beyond being, we were getting into the second hypothesis of what is the being? What is the one that exists purely? But it got a bit tricky, got a bit technical. There's some math thrown in, and it can be hard to focus on that. It can, the counterattacks can come up a bit easier. So one of the reasons we're in here is for this. And we saw in the yoga of the soul separating from the body, what do you do once you have collected yourself from all parts of the body and separated yourself? What do you do? And there was certain language that indicates maybe you're going to continue that process. So our question was, how do we pull that stunt off? How do we collect ourselves from all parts of the body? Well, it didn't actually say body. Other yogas generally focus on that. Bring your attention from all the parts of your body and collect it above your head at the 7th chakra. That's floating above, or maybe it's the 8th. 5, 6, 7, maybe 7. I can't remember. I think it's the 7th, which floats just above your head. But in this text, he doesn't actually use the word body. He says separate the soul from the body by being accustomed, practiced, disciplined, to gather herself together from all quarters. And we recognize, hang on a second, gather thyself together was the expression that Parmenides used for the dialectic. And also he says, by the way, let's actually bring that quote up. It's always fun to bring up this quote. Collect thyself together by that exercise called the dialectic, that the many don't recognize its value. And that's how you'll encounter truth. But also, it was said in the opening of the Parmenides that we play the dialectic game as Socrates wants to do. We grasp the ousia, self, through the activity of the logos. And in that section, he says, not through the senses. So even back then, even at the start of Socrates' journey, he recognized that to do the dialectic is itself an activity that draws you away from your physical senses. So we have a hypothesis we're carrying with us is this thing that we're trying to do that makes us a mystic, makes us a true philosopher, encounter death? How does it relate to the dialectic? If the dialectic is also, let's bring up the text really quickly. This section here, this is the dialectic. This is the section that we turned into our own dialectic from the text. Again, exercising ourselves in that which we're defining, doing a dialectic while learning what it is. This purification definition, which we mentioned in the logo some time ago, is demonstration to separate the soul from the body as far as possible. How do we do it? One, to be accustomed to gather herself together from all quarters, gathering together, and to collect self by self out of the body. This idea of collection and self by self are two of the most fundamental aspects of the dialectic. The collecting together is what we do in the dialectic, and the self by self is the first category of the dialectic. So we were wondering, well, maybe the dialectic isn't just our method or the activity we do to prepare ourselves and make ourselves receptive to this exercise, this stunt, but what we do afterwards as well. We talked about the expression, don't be a metaphysical tourist. Don't use the separation of the body to fly around and stuff like that. So that's what we're wondering about. Is a dialectic also used there? And that's what brought us here from the Parmenides. Because if the second hypothesis is such kind of tricky logos, it's very complicated. Not complicated, but we have to really focus. It might be easier to focus and do the second hypothesis and really nail down with really good understanding the nature of the realm of being. It might be easy. It might be easier to do that in this state of mind. We also said it might be easier to do that if we can somehow figure out a way of purifying ourselves from our problems, so we'll have less counterattacks coming in, which is something that Parmenides warns us about. And we also said, hey, we might be inspired to take on that challenge by reading about the life of Socrates, someone who's actually done it. And maybe this defense is something that can help us in that way. So, remove the anti-logos or pathologos. Develop our logos to be in a better state of being. And also have a mythology that will inspire us. And we recognize that as a triad. Anti-logos or pathologos, logos, and that which can apply to both, mythology. That was a triad that we have in our inventory, in our skill tree. So these are all the questions we've been developing so far. And so what we're going to do now is keep reading. But first, let's reread that last part of his defense, the conclusion of his defense of philosophy and living and dying as a philosopher, which is, of course, hopefully something that will inspire and encourage us to do the same thing. and ask ourselves, were we convinced? As he is trying to convince Simius and Cebes, our pair of knuckleheads that are sitting in our place. I use knuckleheads affectionately compared to Socrates. They're a funny pair. So were we convinced? Are there any puzzles we can see that we maybe missed the first time through? But also, what the heck is this initiation? We recognize that it was written in such a way where it might be a riddle. He might be giving us a puzzle to solve in that section. In fact, he specifically used the word riddle. And that might be an indication that we have a riddle to solve there. So let's have a stab at that riddle to make it into a hypothesis. And if, again, it's a hypothesis, we won't know until we confirm it in our own demonstration or experience. Let's have that and take that with us as we continue to read. So that's what we're doing today. I hope that sounds exciting. Let's jump in. We were reading this part of the text, which we went through last time, which talked about this purification, and how this purification is another way of understanding death. And we did a dialectic on this. But he concludes by saying, well, here's our synthesis and analysis. The liberation and separation of the soul from the body is indeed called death, and only those who practice philosophy in the right way would be most eager to liberate self. And this liberation and separation of the soul from the body is the self-study exercise of the philosophers. That's a big quote. Now, I say we add that to our quotes. So I'm going to add this in as a quote that we can have to refer back to, giving us this quote. Socrates, then only those who practice philosophy in the right way, as we say, are always indeed most eager to liberate self, and this liberation and separation of the soul from the body is the self-study or exercise of the philosophers, is it not? 67D. Now, we were wondering how exactly we do that. It sounds nice, and it makes sense to us, I think. And the dialectic we did, breaking down this section here, we broke it down into a dialectic, which is what we're supposed to do, and is a lot of fun, and makes it ours. And where do we put it? Look at us fly through the universe in this text. Here we go. Like the starting of Star Wars. Here we go. What is it? What's this definition? Hey. So definition is what we start with. You meet a philosopher. Hey, how's your purification going? What? Purification? Yeah, we've already talked about that with the logos, right? I don't get what you're talking about, you crazy son of a bitch. Okay, what? It's demonstration. Oh, it's just separating the soul from the body as far as possible. Right? How's that going for you, fellow philosopher? I'm not too sure. What is it again? Oh, it's accustoming yourself to collect your soul together from all quarters, then collect self by self while you're out of the body, then to dwell alone by self as far as able, and then do it now and in the future. And we saw there's a lot in that. Collecting together, self by self. These are two parts we can recognize in Parmenides' language of the dialectic. Dwelling alone by self. Someone in the chat recognized that sounds like something we hear from Plotinus. Philosophy is the path of the alone to the alone, or path of the alone to the alone. And now in the future, which might help add credence to this idea that we do it to get there, but also while we're there. And also in this lifetime, but also wherever it is that we're going, now and in the future. So it's something, it's a way of being. It's an activity or exercise that we continue to do. Okay, so if you're talking with a philosopher and they were not happy with the simple definition, and then you give them the demonstration. If not, then you give them the division. Those are the ways of understanding the dialectic. Excuse me while I mess with my OBS settings correctly. Okay. But then what do we do after we've divided it up into the steps? We got to bring it together, synthesize it. Oh, that's the liberation and the from the chains of the body. It's the separation of the soul from the body, and we call it death. So that word brings it all together. Then we have to analyze it, bring it back to the self. That's the ousia at the end of the dialectic. Bring it back to this, purification. Death is purification. And he concludes, it's the self-study and exercise of the philosopher. Now, we said, well, that sounds a lot like the kind of language that Socrates was given at the start of his philosophical life from Parmenides. And we went into the text there. So let's bring that up again. Here we go. Exercise. This is the exercise of the philosopher. And after Parmenides recognized he has a problem, Parmenides recognizes Socrates has a problem preventing him from getting into philosophy in this right way. He has a dialogue with him. And then by page 21, he says, well, you have to, well, here's a lot here, actually. Let's read it through, just for fun. Nevertheless, O Socrates, these problems and many other consequences besides these must be so in relation to those ideas, if the idea selves in the real beings exist. If one determines that each one is a certain ideal self, so that one who hears these words is puzzled and questions whether selves do exist, right? And if they do exist in the highest degree, so that it appears abundantly necessary that selves must be unknown by human nature. That's what we hear a lot nowadays. Hey, there is no realm of being. If there is, you can't know it because you're just a lowly human. If there is these ideal selves that exist. Whoever speaks in that way may appear to be saying something important, right? Our false version of the initiation scene. They appear to be appearance, like our distorted two-dimensional image of ourselves in the mirror is just an appearance. They appear to be saying something important, and which we just said now, they may be thought of as being an extraordinary statement, and they are unable to be persuaded. Ever tried persuading your reflection in the mirror of something? Ever tried to persuade a parent or teacher or priest who is really, really fired up and telling you what must be the case about yourself? They seem very certain. We talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect. The more ignorant they are, it appears the more certain they become. and being unable to be convinced. Okay, so this is the distortion of the initiation, and we're reading the actual initiation in the Phaedo. On the one hand, it falls to the ability of an individual like you and me. I said like you and me. Where's our friend? I said like you and me.
You're a wizard, Harry.
There we go. Who are of good natural disposition to be able to learn that there is a certain class or genus of every idea, each idea, and that of self-ousia. Not just ousia, self-ousia. According to and of self. So on the other hand, they will deserve even greater admiration who, having made this discovery, shall be able to teach yet another person.
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
How to thoroughly well to distinguish all these particulars in a sufficient, efficient way. How do we distinguish them? I agree with you, says Socrates, O Parmenides, for you speak according to my nous, my intellect. Parmenides goes on, but nevertheless, in turn, Socrates, if anyone indeed does not permit the ideas of real beings to be, number one, we have to trust that they actually exist. Even if Uncle Joe and drunk Bob at the pub says it doesn't exist. And even if they appear very certain when they say it. And even if they can't be convinced that they're wrong, we still have to, according to Socrates and Parmenides, who's just a little bit more better than Uncle Bob and drunk Bob and Uncle Bill or whoever. Because these people are saying it's what you have to do. That's how you get into the game. You have to permit them to be. And you have to keep your mind fixed. Okay, it says not, but he wants us to flip it and say it in the positive to make it our own. By keeping your mind fixed on all of those objections that come up, the counterattacks. Right? It's one of the reasons we're in the Phaedo. And others like them. What kind of counterattacks have come up for you when we have been reading through this Phaedo, when we've been reading about the soul? Have there been counterattacks saying, surely the soul can't separate from the body? Surely that's not death. Surely that can't be purification. Surely this is not philosophy. Surely a true inspired mystic is not the true philosopher. Have you heard any of those surelys? So Parmenides is saying, hey, keep your mind focused on them when they come up. Okay? Admit the ideas of beings to be. Trust, to begin with. Keep your mind fixed on the objections and others like them. Define each one of the ideas. How? Well, we've been developing a dialectic, right? Define each one of them. And that's where you turn your dianoia, understanding. If you do not allow that, the idea of each real being. Oh yeah, and you also have to recognize that, by the way, as we're going through this, each idea of the real beings is of the self in some way. Holy crap.
Wow. Wow.
What's the beings and the ideas in being have to do with the self? Because I'm a self. You're the self. But what is the self? And this is the power of dialectics. So this thing that we're saying is the dialectics. If you see that, then you perceive much according to my mind. Socrates says, oh, you speak the truth. Does Socrates know the truth? Has he pulled it off yet? Is he coming back in time from the Phaedo to say, oh yeah, I know the truth and you're speaking the truth? What will you do in relation to the philosophy? Okay, we're asking this because we saw at the end of the dialectic on separating the soul from the body, or purification or death. That's a central part of his defense of living the life of philosopher. He says that we call that the self-study and exercise of philosophers. True philosophers. Not the fake ones. Not the ones that don't have an existence. And by existence, of course, we mean being, but also somehow is of the self. How can being be of the self? Can we use our dimensional metaphor that we've been using so well today and last time? Can you say your reflection is of your well, and we wouldn't say of yourself, but when you look in the mirror, is that a reflection of you? Is it of you? A reflection of you in a different dimension? Fundamentally distorted, left is right, right is left. Fundamentally lacking in the third dimension. Fundamentally missing the higher aspects of spiritual evolution. Lacks will, lacks intelligence, lacks language, lacks understanding. But it's still of you. Could we use that as a hypothesis in our sack of ifs? Remember, we have a sack of ifs and a sack of questions, and we take that with us as a philosophical adventurer. There we go. Ifs. And questions. Take both. We've added mythology in the Phaedo too. Seeking excellence. Isn't this fun? I think it's so fun. So, I hope you're finding it fun. By the way, this idea of having fun while being puzzled, it's a curious way of being, right? I'm a musician, and there's talk amongst artists of how to be inspired, in order to be inspired to make music, you have to be open to something you don't have yet, after a higher state of mind, to let the song pour in, because you don't have the song yet. But in order to be open and receptive to it, you have to recognize that you are wrong, or not wrong, that you're confused. You don't know how to solve this melody. You don't know how to solve this part of the song. You don't know how to finish this chorus. But you have to stay there. You can't distract yourself with go and do something else. You can't pretend you know that which you don't, to appear like you're confident on stage. You have to be somehow uncomfortable with the not knowing. You have to have that uncomfortability of not knowing, but be comfortable in that uncomfortable space while still being open and receptive and as best as you can. Comfortable with the uncomfortable, or being okay with being puzzled. That seems to be part of it, right? So we have these questions, but we're puzzled about them, but we're carrying them around, right? And if that's the hero's journey, then what's the distorted version? Well, often heroes are portrayed as, not always, but sometimes, they know everything. Yes, I'm so strong because I'm the one who has all the answers. That's the exact opposite. Left is right, right is left, like a distorted reflection in a mirror. So what would it be like to be comfortable in the uncomfortability of not knowing? The word I like to use for that is wonder. And we are wondering about how the heck we are sharing in the Logos and what that means. So, the self-study and exercise of the philosophers, right? Let's go back into the Parmenides. Then what will you do, Socrates, in relation to philosophy? So Parmenides, Socrates' teacher, talking to a 19-year-old Socrates who's just getting into it, right? Contrasting strongly with what he is at the end of his life, having finished the life of a philosopher. Because he says finished, the reason I say finished is because he's saying he is, if he has perfected and purified himself, he's going to a place with good and wise gods, and also better men that you'll find here who have completed their life. In which case, if he's joining those like that, maybe Socrates has completed his cycles of reincarnation. Which has an interesting analogy to our problems. We recognize our pathologos or anti-logos, specifically pathologos, as the fundamental false beliefs about the nature of reality, being, and the self, and our ability to share in it with the self-logos, right? The triad, the self, self-logos, self-being, and oneself. Fundamental false belief about that. And of course, being includes justice and beauty and goodness and all of the ideas of being. But we recognize that from its effect, we repeatedly go back, or we reincarnate into our problems. We repeat our problems over and over in our relationships, in our play, in our work, in our dreams, in our random thoughts, in our fantasies. So if we purify ourselves from our false beliefs, our undiscovered false beliefs about the self, maybe that can be seen as a reflection or an analogy to what Socrates is saying about completing his life's work. Maybe. It goes into the if sac. So, what will you do in relation to philosophy, says Parmenides to Socrates? In what way will you turn your mind? Now, that's interesting, because in the Phaedo, we've been talking about, let's bring it up. Phaedo. Turn. Actually, let's do a rose search for turn. Here we go. So this is the section where he says, is a philosopher concerned with being a virile person or a courageous or brave person, what we might call an alpha? Eating and drinking and sexual stimulation. What about the body and clothes and shoes and ornaments and Bugattis? Truly a philosopher disdains them indeed. Does it not wholly appear to you that the business of such a person of a philosopher is not concerned with the body, but they stay aloof from the body of the self, since they are turned around towards the soul? So, why do we start talking about that? Well, we recognize that Parmenides is saying at the start of his philosophical journey, where are you going to turn yourself around to? At the end, he said, I'm going to turn myself around to, or I have spent my life in the practice of turning around to the soul. So we have an interesting dialogue happening between the Phaedo and the Parmenides here. Question and answer. So let's bring up this one. Here we go, Parmenides. So where are you going to turn your mind? Since if you are ignorant of the ideas, well, we start, right? We're ignorant of the ideas and being. We're used to looking through our physical senses and living our life that way. Yay, capitalism. Capitalism. Right? But we're ignorant of those ideas. Socrates says, at the present time, I do appear not to see in any way at all. He doesn't know where to turn his mind. But at the end of his life, he says, yeah, turn it around to the soul. But prior to exercising thyself, exercising thyself. So what is the exercise, the study and exercise of the philosophers? Socrates, you should endeavor beforehand to define what's beautiful, just, and good in each one of the ideas. Why? For just now the following came to my mind while hearing you dialogue with Aristotle here. But, therefore, on the one hand, your impulse, on one hand. Therefore, men, in the Greek, the impulse by which you are compelled towards the Logos is beautiful and divine. You may be sure of that. Whereas on the other hand, you must also collect thyself together. Oh. Collect thyself together. What are we reading in the Phaedo? Collect soul together.
Wow.
Collect thyself together by exercising more in that way, which appears to be useless to the multitude, and called by them empty talk. For if you do not, while you are still young, the truth will utterly elude you. Socrates says, what then is the way of this exercise? The way that you've heard Zeno practicing. And I'll be quite pleased with this that you said to him, because you would not allow Zeno to look upon the wandering that exists among the objects of sight, or in relation to them. What's the wandering that exists in the objects of sight or in relation to them? Dun 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 dun. This. The pleasures of the body. Eating, drinking, sexual stimulation, buying clothes, shoes, ornaments. Clothes, shoes, ornaments. Are they things of wanderings that we have in relation to the sight and the other senses of the physical body? And we don't grasp the truth. When does the soul grasp the truth? I mean, he says the truth will elude you if you don't do the exercise. Now our question is, well, why, before we do this exercise, do we have to go ahead and define the good and beautiful and just? So I thought the exercise was the dialectics. Isn't that? Well, in order to do a dialectic, you have to have something material. You can't do the dialectic, definition, demonstration, division, analysis, or SSSOOOS, without some content. So go ahead and, from your reading of Plato, and maybe the other philosophers too, but I like to stick with Plato primarily. What do you know about beauty so far? Define it. Give yourself some material to work with, which is why we're reading together. So back into the Parmenides. Don't allow yourself or Zeno to look upon the objects of sight or the wandering that exists in relation to them, but to consider according to those which one can grasp, especially by the Logos. And in this way, one would be led to see the ideas. Okay. And then he went ahead and outlined gave us some content or material from which we unpacked the structure of the dialectic. Take up the Logos. And then he said, by the way, Socrates says, oh, that's cool. Can you speak of an extraordinary study of the realities in this thing you call dialectic. But I don't quite understand. Could you hypothesize the self for me so that I can understand? And we say,
Sneaky little hobbitses.
Because he didn't go to beauty, justice, or goodness, he went to the self. He wants the ultimate. Good for him. Shooting for the ultimate is a mark of a philosopher. Shooting for excellence is what we're doing. And why we're going back to the what we've already read. Phaedo. So let's bring up the Phaedo again. So using all that, we can sort of come to a hypothesis that what he's saying in here, collect yourself together, self by self, that he calls death and purification and liberation and separating from the body, is the exercise of the philosophers. And what do we just read? How will you exercise yourself in relation to philosophy, says Parmenides. So maybe this is what we will encounter if we continue our practice of the dialectic. Maybe. Okay? And by the way, that's a crossing over from the association with the body. That's a liberation. We are a lover of phronesis. So we want to know what the heck phronesis is, because I don't remember phronesis being talked about by Parmenides. He talked about philosophy, philosophia. What are you going to do in relation to philosophia? But he didn't mention something about philophronesis. So what is phronesis? That's our puzzle. He says it many times. Pure phronesis happens in death. True philosopher is after pure phronesis. He's a lover of phronesis. They yearn for phronesis. Phronesis, phronesis, phronesis. It's a phronesis party up in here. What the heck is phronesis? Well, Socrates then starts talking about the virtues. He said, hey, this is what philosophy is. This is a purification. It's death. Philosophy is the study and practice of dying and being dead. So while we keep doing this dialectic, even while we're dead. Interesting. So we've got a game to play after this life and in this life, but when we're separated from our body, mystic. Okay, so why keep going? That's the question. Why keep going? That's one we always ask. Why keep going? We talked about the dialectic. Hey, if you're given a definition, if you said, hey, by the way, let's have a conversation. Do you know purification? Sure. There's no need to keep going. Oh, what's purification again? Then you keep going. Oh, it's separating the soul from the body as far as possible. No need to keep going. Definition, demonstration. They ask, oh, I don't quite follow. Oh, division. Divided up into its arguments. There's a reason to go on. That's why it's a dialectic. That's why philosophy is a two-person game. It happens with another person. It's a call and response, we will call it in music. And we looked at the first hypothesis of, we looked at Socrates answering questions of Parmenides. Like, hey, do you know where you're going to turn yourself in relation to philosophy? I don't know. Where am I going to turn around to? How about the exercises you saw Zeno doing? So it's back and forth. You're relating specifically to the person, right? Or the subject if you're doing it and doing your own dialectic. But even in a dialectic you do yourself, it's you have a self and other. So we did one based on philosophy in relation to death. Self is philosophy and the other is death. These are our notes for that. So our question is, why keep going? Why go on? Why is there a necessity to go on? Even when Socrates said to Parmenides, hey, can you give me a dialectic of the self? He said no. And then he said there's a reason to go on when Zeno asked. Maybe Zeno was ready. So our question is, why go on? There has to be if the author's reasoning is following the logos and the dialectic, there has to be a reason why he's going on. So he explains what it is. He explains what purification is. He explains that it's death. He explains what liberation is. He says this is what it means to do philosophy in the right way. And he says that to do this is the study and exercise of the philosophers. Because we've done some work and we carry our understanding with us, and it unfolds upon itself, reverts upon itself, and continues to roll forward, ousia. We can recognize that as a dialectic, so we have a lot to go with. So why not stop there? Why go on to this section of mindfulness? We yearn for mindfulness. What? I thought we yearned for liberation and beings. What's this mindfulness? We are truly a lover of mindfulness. I thought we were a lover of wisdom. Isn't that the encountering and logos? The mystic and intellectual? The intelligible and intellectual? The knowledge and understanding? The nous and dianoia? Isn't that the logos as the method for experiencing being? Isn't that wisdom? Isn't that the love of wisdom? What's this mindfulness? True philosopher is convinced that he will never encounter pure mindfulness anywhere else but there. What is mindfulness? Why did he shift from wisdom, philosophia, to mindfulness, philophronesis? And then he goes on, by the way, let's talk about what philosophy isn't. A lover of the body. Philo for love. Philosoggy tomatoes. Philosometos. A lover of charred tomatoes. A lover of riches. Philochamatos. The chamatos? I create a little mythology as a mnemonic device to remember it. Yeah, crematos. Cremated. Not charred. Or burned all the way. Dead tomatoes. Riches. Riches are even more dead than a body, so they're cremated. So it's philocrematos. Philo, love. Cremated, tomatoes, matos. Lover of riches. And Timos from the Timocratic soul, lover of honors, Philotimos. That's a little triad that we see here in the text of what philosophy isn't. Remember the dialectic? The exercise that we're doing? What it is and what it isn't. Hey, philosophy, not only philosophia, he said it's lover of learning. Philomathos. No, mathesis. Math thesis, right? If you're doing a math thesis, you must really love learning. Philomathesis, lover of learning. Philosophia, lover of wisdom. And maybe the peak of the triad, philophronesis. And of course, what it's not is it's distortion. Okay, so maybe we can use this triad, lover of the body, lover of riches, and lover of honors, as the negative to understand the positive. Interesting. Lover of honors. Is that the opposite of lover of learning? Lover of acquiring riches. Is that the opposite of lover of learning? Lover of wisdom honors is one step down, or a distortion of the Timocratic man in the Republic. The honor-loving soul is a way of ruling, and it is a state. You can have a state like the Spartans. They were ruled by the warlike people. Like there are some places in the world today, they're not ruled by a king, a philosopher king, or the aristocratic in the philosophical sense, kingly, philosopher king. They're ruled by warlords. They want to have honor. Manly men, in that distorted sense, right? Lover of honor. Warlike men who acquire riches and stuff. Lover of riches. So maybe honor is the distortion of wisdom. Riches is the distortion of learning. Lover of the body is the distortion of lover of phronesis. Maybe take it in our sack. Put it in your hypothesis sack. So, our question is why? Why does he start talking about phronesis? Then he says what philosophy isn't. Then let's talk about those who have virility. Virility, that's the outward moving part of the soul, which is related to the virtue of courage. In your outward movement, hold on to the truth of the Logos in whatever you're doing. Ups and downs, pleasures and pains, as it says in the Republic. And he says a true virile person is someone who is a lover of phronesis and does not fear death. Oh, okay, so yes, if you don't fear death, we call that virility. So virility is a way of being in courage. You're brave. So virility, you could say brave. Don't fear death. What about sound-mindedness? Which means you're not being swept away by your passions. So he says sound-mindedness and he defines his term, not being swept away by his passions. He says virility and he defines his term. What is it? Someone who has this disposition, not fearing death. So definition of the terms as he goes. So what is it? Not being swept away by your passions, but that's what you're not. But aloof from the body and being in an ordered way. Disdaining the body, aloof from. Not taking it in light, taking light heed, not taking heed. That was the word for disdain. So that's phronesis, to live in philosophy and paying little heed, only doing what's necessary to your bodily passions. That's sophrosyne, or temperance, or sound-mindedness. One of the 4 virtues. Sound-mindedness, courage, wisdom, and justice. But if we bring to mind the courage and the sound-minded, the courageous and the sound-minded, isn't there something that will appear to you strange? What do you mean? Well, don't we think that death is the greatest of all badnesses, not evil? Kakon, yes. But the brave among us accept death. They submit to death when they fear something worse happening to them. Sure. Accordingly, then, they're brave by being afraid and because they have no choice out of necessity. Except for the philosophers. So this allowing death to happen isn't something they want, but they fear. And it's not something they seek, but they have no choice. That's what we normally call someone who's brave, even today. But that's the opposite of philosophy. So we have what's not true is a distorted reflection. Hey, they still will accept death and we still call them courageous. But what's the distortion? What is it lacking? Like your mirror image lacks intelligence and will and understand. It lacks, well, understanding. It lacks will. It lacks the same things in the mirror. Why? Because they're not seeking it because of an understanding of the truth of purification and attaining truth of being. They're doing it out of fear. So they lack understanding. They lack the logos. And they're not doing it out of a desire and a choice. They're doing it out of necessity. They have no choice. The exact opposite of philosophy. We want it and we understand why and we desire it. We're not afraid. But we call courageous people those who accept death out of fear and out of necessity. Isn't that wild? What do you say, Owen?
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Except the philosophers. And yet it is most irrational for a brave to be out of some need and some fear. Yes. It's not really brave, is it? By all means. But what of the orderly? Is not their experience the same? For if they are of sound mind out of a lack of discipline? Yet we claim this to be quite impossible. What of the orderly among us? So now we've covered brave. Let's go to well-ordered, or the virtue of temperance, a well-ordered soul. The temperance, we've got parts of our soul, inward desiring, outward, which we talked about. How do you move outwardly with courage? What do you seek? Anything but death? Or, if you're a philosopher, you seek death. As this kind of way, this kind of understanding. As defined by your logos, your dialectic, confirmed and experienced, hopefully too. Let's go to the temperance. The ordered. The simple-minded experience of temperance turns out to be equally like that. Oh no, because they're fearing to be deprived of those pleasures which they desire. Out of fear again. And what do they fear? They don't want to lose the pleasures. And so they keep away from some so they can be mastered by others. I'm not going to spend all my money on gambling so I can spend all my money on booze. That kind of idea, right? Whereas a philosopher would say, hey, I'm gonna not spend all my money on gambling so I can support myself, so I can do philosophy. So I'm a lover of learning. Philomathesis. I'm a lover of wisdom. Philosophia. And apparently a lover of phronesis, but I don't know what that is yet. I do voices sometimes. So they keep away from some by being mastered by others, even though they do appear, even though they do indeed call being under the rule of pleasures a lack of discipline. It's contradictory. This is what we would say to them. Oh yeah, so you have temperance, right? You have that virtue. Oh yeah. I never spend all my money on gambling. But you spend it on booze. So isn't being under the rule of pleasures a lack of discipline? But what is equally the case for selves is that they master certain pleasures in order to be mastered by other, so they're not the master. So in terms of the soul, we can see here. If we were to draw the soul, we have the biggest part of the body, our inner desires. In the Taoist tradition, that's symbolized by the belly. So we can say belly. And they have breathing techniques on how to order yourself by controlling the belly. So we can use that as a myth. We have the next largest part of our soul, which is our outward moving. And the Taoists represent that with the heart. So we can borrow their mythology the same way Socrates is borrowing the mythology of Aesop. And we have the smallest part of the body, our reasoning. Reasoning part. Of course, famously, we're told that lives in our head. Of course it doesn't, it's the mind, not the brain, but it's a good myth. If we talk about the virtues, temperance is normally associated with, well, let's use sound-mindedness, because that's in our text here. It's normally associated with this, but it's not just this. It's ordering your desires in the right way, so you're like this, like a pyramid. You desire what the reasoning wants. Outward moving is the virtue of courage. And we also saw that's what being virile is. And the reasoning virtue is the logos, but also wisdom is the virtue. Okay. So a lot of people, their souls are ordered in a different kind of way, where their belly rules them. They want money. They want to eat all the cakes. They want to have all of the sexual stimulations. And then, they kind of like being well thought of. That's kind of next in line. And the desire of our reasoning part, wisdom and logos, it's like the lowest. So they're kind of like this. And it makes sense because it's the strongest part of our soul. That's why we talk about discipline. We put these virtues in through a discipline, returning over and over. Ousia. We meet at the gates of the Parmenides each morning. We meet at the gates of the Phaedo, like Phaedo did with his buddy, to talk about the self and listen to others talk about the self. What we do, we go into these videos every day. We read this text every day if we can. Well, yeah. So but it's fun. That's the thing. It's discipline in the sense you have to practice it, but it's not flagellation. So this is the misunderstanding of you're not beating your desires. Right? You're not saying, oh, naughty for wanting the cakes. It's fun. You see the fun in it. You see the joy in it. And the more you practice it, the more you can turn your soul around so your reasoning is ruling. And then you discover, oh, actually, the desires or the pleasures of this part, which is the smallest, it has the quietest voice, is actually the best. Because this is what experience pure beauty, pure goodness, pure justice, pure reality, pure truth. This physical distortions that you seek if you're this kind of person, upside down sort of person, are mere shadows and distortions. You're never going to be satiated. You're always going to be at war and in battle. You're never going to get what you truly seek. That's why we need discipline or sound-mindedness. Okay? But again, it's not the negative sense. So sound-mindedness is realizing that wisdom seeks the logos. So actually, we should actually move this around the other way. Because the virtue is called logos. Oops. The virtue is called wisdom, but what it seeks is logos. The virtue is wisdom, and what it seeks is logos. So that's what it seeks. The inner desires are pulled to, clothes, ornaments, food, eating, drinking, sex, that sort of thing. Your middle one seeks honor and fame. But sound-mindedness is ordering it so what you want to seek is this. What you want to outwardly move, how you want to spend your activities while you're alive is this. So if every part of your soul seeks the same thing, you are made one. You are unified. You are unified. Okay? Now, that's important to realize because... Oh, and so courage is the same thing. Holding on to what wisdom says is truth through the logos as you go through your life. The ups and downs, the pleasures, the pains, the good times, the bad times. That's courage. Now, what we're reading here is saying, hey, some people appear to have sound-mindedness because they are not ruled by certain desires, but they're not seeking the logos, they're seeking other desires. Equally so, people who seem courageous and accept death don't want death because they realize through the logos that this is what we seek as philosophers. They fear death. And they're afraid, they're afraid of losing. They're afraid of worse things happening to them. So they have no choice. So they're not motivated by the logos. So that's the distortion. Okay, so we have a question. Why did he bring in the word phronesis? Number one. So let's add that as a question. question. Why, after explaining the correct life's work and nature of philosophy, purification, death, did he go on to Phronesis? Oh, salutations. Welcome to the chat. We are trying to figure out what the heck philosophy is by reading Plato's Phaedo. Plato's Phaedo is the last day of Socrates. He's in prison. He was sentenced to death by engaged in the life's work of philosophy, but he's saying that he's going to fare well. He's not afraid of death. In fact, he's looking forward to it. He trusts that he's going to be with good gods, good and wise gods, and better humans than he'll find here. And he'll be able to engage with them in a better way where he's going. And he's explaining why that's the case. In order to do so, he had to explain what exactly philosophy is. And he said, philosophy is the love of wisdom, philosophia. Wisdom is encountering the realm of being. All of the selves are there. Self-beauty, self-justice, self-truth, knowledge is there. So when the Greeks use the word self, it's the honorific. So it has its own self, but the word self means the highest, the excellence. And he says, by the way, this realm of being is not seen through the eyes or the physical senses. If that's how, that's a corruption of philosophy. We need to separate the soul from the body. So that's why I'm not afraid of dying, because I've been practicing and experiencing and studying the art and practice of death and dying my whole life, because that's what philosophy is. He also talked about what philosophy isn't. And we've been seeing here, it isn't pursuing what we normally consider virile or brave or manly, which is, looking at the text here, where is it? A little bit further back. Clothes, shoes, ornaments of the body. So here's the text. I will be present with those gods that are wise and good, and later with human beings who have completed their life, which is a puzzle. What does he mean? How do you complete your life? And is it to do with completing the reason for being here? And they're better than those here. That's good, because the people who are here sent them to death, which is not so good. He said, for it is unaware, this is his doctrine, this is his defense. He said, look, I couldn't convince the people who are at my trial that philosophy is needed, and I'm a great man, and I'm a gift to humanity from the gods. But I will give you my defense, and hopefully I'm going to convince you, my friends who are with me in my prison cell, better than I convinced them. This is his great doctrine. The many happen to be unaware that those who pursue philosophy correctly pursue contacting nothing else than dying and being dead. And we say,
Wow. Wow.
I did not remember hearing that at Philosophy 101 at college. So he says, hey, so therefore I've desired and practiced dying, so I'm not going to be afraid of dying, right? And he said, but his friend Simmias laughs, Where's my laugh button? No. He laughs. And he says, yeah, like when you hear people talk about philosophers, yeah, they're pretty much dead. They don't do all the things we like to do. And you say that philosophers deserve death, yeah, the people will agree with you, ha 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 ha, because they think that you are useless. And he said, well, they're telling the truth, Simmias, except they're unaware of the way true philosophers are engaged in death and the way they are deserving of death. So these are puzzles we get, and what kind of death it is. He talks about the separation of the life of the body. He says what philosophy isn't is eagerly pursuing the pleasures. What people call being a virile person. And today we might call them being a sigma or an alpha or manly or something like that. So those people are concerned with eating, drinking, sexual stimulation, having a nice body, buying clothes, shoes, ornaments for the body, Bugattis. We were wondering, how does he know about Bugattis 2,000 years ago? But we're not sure about that. A true philosopher disdains those sorts of things. And they try and stay aloof from the body. Socrates was basically the guy who was like, if they kill me, it means I was right. Yeah, it means I was right that the people here don't really appreciate what he's talking about. And hopefully the people who've completed their lives that he's going to find in that next life are going to be better to talk to and play with. But fortunately, we have the internet. So we have a wider scope with which we can connect with like-minded souls who are curious about actually understanding the truth and actually living in the best way and preparing for death in the best way. These questions, where do we come from? Where are we going? And what should we be doing while we're here? Are the three questions that make us rational. The three questions you would ask in any video game you play. The three questions we collectively ignore. But we don't have to, because we have the Phaedo. And we have a new translation of the Phaedo which actually translates the terms correctly. And that's what we're reading. You get a copy. There should be a link underneath of a copy if you want this. It's the Balboa translation. The author has given me permission to share it. It's an alternative route, but I have schizophrenia and it has made me so much closer to reality, even though it's considered to be a delusion-based issue. Right, so what we want to do is perfect ourselves, purify ourselves. Purification is a big word. Purify ourselves from that which is false and has a negative influence on our pursuit of philosophy, and perfect ourselves in the Logos. The Logos is a Greek word that we have to introduce into English because we don't have it. That means understanding, and also is the rational order that permeates all of reality. Whether you're studying music or geometry or astronomy, there's a certain pattern called the Logos. And we want to follow that to the source of the Logos in being. And also, even when we pull off this stunt, even when we as a philosopher liberate our soul from association with the body, we also want to... He talks about meeting people there and engaging with gods there. So there we ask the question, what do we do next? If there is such a thing as self-beauty, beauty itself, not a beautiful thing we see through our physical senses, and we pursue to have or to have sex with, like people who do not engage in philosophy, but beauty itself, self-beauty, and justice itself, and truth itself. We can ask, well, what is this self thing? Which might be the sort of conversation Socrates has using the dialectic and the Logos he's developed in his life here to take with him into the next life. Right. It helps to get into this by allowing yourself to think outside the box. Yes. Plato's forms. Right. So, you might recognize this as Plato's forms, but the word form is not the word form. That is a fundamental mistranslation. The word we see over and over is the word idea. Idea is a Greek word that sounds like idea, but it's not a concept. It means to behold. So we can behold with our mind in something called ousia, the eye of the soul. So if there's no physical body, how do you have your selfhood? You can turn about and maintain your integrity as a being. That's called ousia. So that's how the soul can grasp the truth. The soul is beguiled by the body, but we want to turn ourselves around. And let's look for turn. We want to turn ourselves around here towards the soul. Here we go. Turn ourselves around towards the soul. That cognitive function, that sense, is called ousia. So if we can do that and we can pull this stunt off, turn around towards the soul and separate from the association from the body, like we're liberating ourselves from chains, he says, we can grasp the truth of the real beings. Now you can distinguish in that experience of the realm of being that it's beauty itself. But it's also perfectly ordered, perfectly the way it should be, so it's just. So that's the ideas, the intellectual distinctions you can make about the aspects or the qualities of this realm of pure being. So yes, that's a good question in the chat. How do we pull off this stunt? How do we turn our turn around to look at the soul? Well, he says, first of all, we, as you've said, you shouldn't care too much about what other people say because they don't recognize this. In fact, we have some good quotes from the last read along, and you can find that on YouTube down below, on the Parmenides. Parmenides is the start of Socrates' life as a philosopher. He was about 19, so this is the end in the Phaedo. In the Parmenides, he said, look, Parmenides said to Socrates as a kid, hey, look, you give heed to the opinions of human beings. You got to stop doing that. What you just said, think outside the box a little bit. Okay? And he also says, Zeno says, the many are ignorant that without this discursive procession through all of those beings, it happens to be impossible for the intellect to hold on to truth. Parmenides says you have to collect yourself together by exercising more in that way that appears useless to the many and is called by them empty talk. For if you do not, while you are still young, the truth will utterly elude you. And you might recognize the word that keeps coming up, dialectic. Oh, got two quotes at the same time. We don't want that. Let's wait for one to go away. Here we go. Permit the ideas of the real beings to be, even if everybody on your block says that doesn't exist. Keep your mind fixed on all of those objections. The counterattacks. People saying do something else. Your body coming in and saying, hey, get a sandwich instead of this. Define each one of those ideas. That's where you turn your understanding. We call that dianoia. And you also have to recognize that the idea of each one of the real beings, what we mistranslate as forms, but the word is idea, capital I. All of those ideas, beauty itself, justice itself, goodness itself, they are always of the self. This is the power of dialectics. So we are trying to figure out what the heck is dialectics. Socrates says in the Parmenides, we want to solve this puzzle about the ousia. That's the part of the mind that can turn around and experience itself, that is woven together into the idea selves. We want to demonstrate in detail about the ideas which we grasp by the activity of the logos and not which we see through our physical senses, is the rest of that quote. So that's the hypothesis we're working on. How exactly do we turn around to the soul? So that's the clues we have, but we don't know. So keep that question. Part of being a philosopher is developing questions. To have a question is to be on a quest. So this is us. We have a sack of questions we have in our inventory and we carry with us forever until the question explodes into a million pieces and we have an insight in our state of mind, and often a new question comes to birth. So have that as a question. It's a good question. How exactly do we pull this stunt off? So, we want to turn around towards the soul as far as we're able. And he calls that purification. That's how we have the intuitive knowledge. Through our understanding. So he says here, have you grasped the selves, the idea selves, through any of your bodily perceptions? I mean, such as greatness itself, health itself, strength itself, and in one word, the ousia of all of those, whatever the self happens to be. Of course you haven't. That which is most true of selves is not contemplated through the body. Whoever of us prepares themselves, here we go, through most accurately understanding each self you investigate. So this is part of it. How do you most accurately understand each of the selves? Right. Tolstoy's idea, the kingdom of heaven is within. Absolutely. Right. And there are other people who say, oh, if you translate certain quotes from Jesus, even, he says, there's a special section where he talks to someone and he recognizes, oh, you're in an interesting state of mind. You are close to this state of mind of the kingdom of heaven, which also adds to this idea. It's a state of mind. Of course, if we're separating the soul from the body, within does not mean within the body. It's within our consciousness or our state of mind. So separating from the body might be the same thing. It says that's gnosis, the intuitive knowing of each of the beings. Happens through self-understanding. Self means the honorific. So you have to seek excellence in your understanding. This purifies yourself. And that's how you acquire truth and phronesis. So we've got another question on the board. What the heck is phronesis? So there's a straight path to guide us along with the logos. So we're developing the logos. What the heck is the logos? What is this way of thinking and reasoning that's a straight path that will lead us to what we want? Which is what? Truth. And what? Mindfulness. But the Greek word is phronesis. So we don't exactly know what that is yet. The body's a corrupting agent. It fills us with passions, desires, fears, illusions, foolishness. We want truth in reality and phronesis again. It does not arise in the body, for the body and its desires brings nothing else than war, civil discord, and battles. Why? For all wars arise through the acquisition of possessions. For it is the sake of the body that we are compelled to acquire riches, and we become enslaved to its care. Because through and out of all this, we have no leisure for philosophy. Oh my God. And worst of all, the fact is, even if we do have some rest from our bodies, pull and this and that way, and we turn to some study, everywhere in our search, the body falls in again and presents itself in a clamor and pouring in, and it drives us out of our mind. It counterattacks. So we are not enabled by self. So our self is a key part to behold the truth. If we ever want to enter into a pure state, we must be liberated from the body and must behold the self-realities with the self-soul, the highest part of the soul, to see the realities themselves, the ideas. And also, we claim to be lovers of phronesis. So we want to know, why do you keep saying phronesis, and why are we lovers of phronesis? As the Logos points out, we only get that while we're dead, not while we live. Because it's impossible to intuitively know in a pure way with the body. So either we get it when we're dead, when the soul is separated from the body, or we can't have it at all. So while we live, we are closest to knowing if we neither. So here's might be something that can add to your question, help your question. We shall be closest to knowing in the following way. This is all Socrates' defense of living the life of philosophy. When we neither associate nor commune with the body as much as possible, not in any way more than necessary, okay? Maybe put on some clothes so you don't get kicked out of McDonald's. But other than that, we must not be filled with the body's nature. We must purify ourselves from the body until this is a big thing here. Until the divine self should liberate us. This has been a puzzle too. Why does he say it in that way? It doesn't seem to be something we do, but we prepare ourselves. We purify ourselves to become receptive to sharing in. And we've been talking about the metaphor of the mirror. A mirror is a two-dimensional reflection of yourself. And he's saying, hey, you've got to permit the ideas to be of self in the dialectic. So how is the realm of being of the self? Well, we could say our mirror reflection is of ourself, but it's fundamentally not ourselves. It lacks. By having by diminishing it from a three-dimensional person to a two-dimensional reflection in the mirror, you lose vital aspects: intelligence, will, understanding, life. And it's fundamentally wrong. You hold up your left hand, that guy holds up his right hand. It's mistaken. So we want to leave our three-dimensional reality to experience the fourth-dimensional reality, so we can do philosophy better. So we don't have the desires and fears and foolishness pouring in and driving us out of our mind. Purify ourselves from that which drives us out of our mind. The mind. So if we want to go from our three-dimensional world to our fourth-dimensional reality, it does kind of make sense that the divine self, a fourth-dimensional part of ourself, liberates us. Oh, thanks for the follow. Because if we can recognize that we in our third dimension has understanding, will, intelligence, vitality that the two-dimensional self has, then whatever happens to the two-dimensional reflection wouldn't be caused by it. It'd be caused by us. In a similar way, we do what we can to become most like the divine, until the divine self should liberate us. And what's interesting about that is that whole what's being defined is also being demonstrated. Definition and demonstration. They're the first two categories of the four categories of the dialectic, by the way. And I encourage you to check out the other playlists on YouTube, because we really explore the four categories of the dialectic, because that seems to be our exercise. But also, we're on page 16, but if we go all the way to the start, Socrates says, hey Socrates, what are you going to do in your time before you die, before the sun sets? Well, he talks about making his own music because his dreams are telling him to. So he always listens to the commands of his dreams. He uses the poems of Aesop's fables, and he adds the logos to them, but he also makes his own. He makes his own hymns to the Apollo, who represents philosophy. But he says he wants to... Oh, he says, by the way, tell Euvenos, if he's a good philosopher and if he's of sound mind, to follow me as quickly as possible. Which is a question. He wants to thoroughly examine and mythologize about the journey to that place and what kind of place we think it is. So define, thoroughly explain, understand it, the logos as much as possible, the logos and the dialectic, but also mythologize. Create stories about it, helps you remember, helps you communicate it. So we're looking for the mythologies too in this story. So what's interesting is Phaedo, who's telling the story about Socrates' last day, meets up in the gate at the gateway of the jail until he's let in to see Socrates. He makes it a habit. And so we are deducing, we are inferring, we're creating a hypothesis. That's part of it. As a philosophical adventurer,
You're a wizard, Harry.
we have a hypothesis that this is the true hero's journey and is the archetype or the idea or the true form of the hero's journey we see in gaming and film. That's the true philosopher. That's the true hero. We take with us questions and we take them in our question sack, in our inventory. But we also create mythologies about what we understand. And we develop hypotheses, ifs. Take them with you. Try out your hypotheses. Carry them with you. See if it works out. And of course, we seek excellence. We look for key terms, those self-er terms, what is mistranslated as forms, the ideas. Often it's called self-beauty and self-justice. So if we recognize that they are all of the self, and even they often have the word self in front of them, we call them self-er terms. We look for those. So mythology is part of it. And Socrates is saying, hey, that's what I'm going to do too. I'm going to make some music. You are a super fantastic teacher. I'm really impressed at how inspiring and informative you are. Thank you so much for that feedback. Yeah, it's kind of easy because philosophy is, there's a way, Homo sapien is a way of describing people, which means man the thinker. There's another way, Homo ludens, which means man the player. Some people think we are here to play, and philosophy is the noblest game. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I'm privileged to be able to share it online with people like you who can come across it. And we have the, yep. Take your time. I'll be here. So that's what we're doing, examining and mythologizing. So that's a bit of a recap for everybody. So what you lose in philosophy is your false beliefs about what your mind is. We actually use this. We use the self-er triad. Part of discovering the logos in our hunt is looking for patterns. So we have skill trees. This is our skill trees. So you look for triads and you put a triad on a branch of a skill tree. You look for duads or twos and fours. See, that's part of it. There are key terms you develop and you put in your key term sack, but you also look for patterns because the logos is the patterns of reality. It's the paradigm. That's how come we can use it as a ladder to climb up to our destiny. So, yes, philosophy is only dangerous if you want to hold on to or you're loyal to the false beliefs about yourself. So one triad is a triad of the self. The highest triad. Where is it? Here we go. The excellence triad. You could say, well, what are we fundamentally? What are we seeking in philosophy? We want our highest state of mind. We want to get our highest state of mind, the self state of mind, or our excellent state of mind. That's self-being, the realm of being that we're seeking, that we can only experience if we separate our soul in the way we've been talking about. It could also be called state of mind. So we want the self state of mind. We get there through our understanding in a certain way we call the logos. But hey, it's not my opinions or your opinions. It's not individual, it's universal. So we call it the self logos. And even the beings, even justice and beauty and excellence itself are of the one self. That's the first hypothesis of Parmenides, that we have a series that I'm uploading now onto YouTube. The first hypothesis of the Parmenides is on the one self. The second is of what is normally referred to as enlightenment, the highest state of mind. So self-understanding leads us to the realm of being. And then if we've developed this dialectic and use of our understanding, that even when we get there to great and wise gods, and also greater men than you normally find around these parts, we will probably want to talk to them with the logos in a dialectic like we're doing right now. So we can even use the logos when we get there, maybe. That's one of the questions we have from Socrates' Doctrine we've just been reading. In which case, maybe we can go from being to the one self, which is prior or beyond being. And we call that the destiny of man. So, what do we lose? If we say, hey, you lose your mind, you're going to lose your false understanding about what your mind is. You're going to lose your false beliefs. You are going to lose your false identity with what you think you are. That's the purification we've been talking about. Purify ourselves from what is false and practice and develop what is true. That's true philosophy. And that's what we're here to rediscover. And that's why we're reading this text.